The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the shifting sands of Ocracoke Inlet. The air was cool, damp with salt, and heavy with the smell of marsh and brine. In the stillness, two ships of the Royal Navy, the Ranger and the Jane, lay poised, their sails furled, their decks alive with silent preparation. On board, Lieutenant Robert Maynard surveyed the shallow waters ahead. Somewhere beyond the bar of the inlet was his quarry, the most infamous pirate of the age. Edward Teach, or Thatch, or perhaps another name entirely, was waiting. His small sloop, the Adventure, rocked gently in the tide, her crew alert, her guns ready. But the man himself was calm. Tall, gaunt, his great black beard coiled into pigtails and tied with ribbons, a bandolier of pistols slung across his chest, he stood on deck like a figure carved from iron. As Maynard's ships advanced, the silence shattered. Cannon roared, smoke rolled across the water. The Adventure shuddered under the first broadside, but Blackbeard did not flinch. He raised a glass of rum, shouted across the water that he would give no quarter, and fired back. Minutes later, musket balls hissed through the air as Maynard's men closed in. Blackbeard led his crew in a fierce counterattack, boarding the Jane in a final gamble. In the melee, Maynard's sword broke, and for a moment it seemed the pirate would cut him down. But one of the lieutenant's men struck from the side, slashing Blackbeard's neck. He was shot moments later. The man who had terrified the Caribbean for nearly 2 years staggered, bled, and finally fell. By some accounts, it took 5 gunshot wounds and 20 sword cuts to bring him down. His body was cast into the waters of the inlet. His head was taken and hung from Maynard's bowsprit, a grim trophy for the journey home. But how had it come to this? Who was this man, whose birthplace remains a mystery, and how had he risen from obscurity to become the most feared pirate of his time? The truth is, we do not know where Edward Teach was born, or even if that was his real name. Records from the early 18th century list him as Edward Teach, Edward Thatch, or some variation. Some sources claim he was born around 1680 in Bristol, England, a bustling port city and the second largest in the country at the time. It was a hub of Atlantic trade, where many men went to sea. Bristol's claim comes from contemporary descriptions calling him a Bristol man born, but others point to Jamaica, citing a document that describes him as born in Jamaica, of very creditable parents. A more recent theory argues he was actually Edward Beard from Bath County, North Carolina. With no conclusive proof, any of these origins is as plausible as the next. What we do know is that he was born into the expanding English colonial empire. By the late 17th century, England had planted colonies in North America and the Caribbean, following in the wake of Spain and Portugal's earlier conquests. The colonies produced lucrative goods, sugar, tobacco, coffee, cocoa, which flowed back to England's ports, enriching merchants and fueling further expansion. To understand Blackbeard, we need to understand the world of seafaring violence he stepped into. In the early modern period, piracy was a loose term. The more respectable form was privateering, captains licensed by governments to attack the ships of rival nations. They carried letters of marque that offered legal cover, even if their actions skirted the line of war and peace. The other form was outright piracy, or buccaneering, independent raiders who answered to no one and took what they pleased. They often sheltered in remote havens, first in Ireland or the English West Country, and later in the Caribbean. By the late 17th century, the Caribbean was thick with targets. The shipping lanes between the colonies and Europe were busy, and the profits enormous. The stage was set for a golden age of piracy. The real explosion came after 1700. The death of King Charles II of Spain without an heir sparked the War of the Spanish Succession. England, the Dutch Republic, Austria, and other powers fought to prevent France from gaining control of Spain's vast empire. Much of this war was fought at sea, from the Caribbean to the North American coast. During the war, the English crown issued letters of marque to privateers, a cost-effective way to wage war. Many future pirates, Blackbeard among them, began their careers here. Teach appears in the record as a sailor active in the Caribbean, likely serving on ships attacking Spanish vessels. He could read and possibly write, suggesting he came from at least a modestly well-off family. By the early 1710s, he was a senior officer on a privateering ship. In 1713, the war ended. Peace left thousands of privateers unemployed. Many turned pirate rather than settle for lower pay in the merchant trade. Edward Teach was one of them. By 1716, he was sailing under the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet, a wealthy landowner turned buccaneer. Teach started as a foremast man, but soon proved his boldness. At some point, Bonnet's crew ousted their captain and placed Teach in command. Yet the two seem to have remained on friendly terms. If friendly can describe the shifting alliances of the pirate world. By 1717, Blackbeard was sailing alongside Bonnet and another captain, Benjamin Hornigold. Their hunting grounds stretched from the Carolinas to the Bahamas. That autumn, Teach and Hornigold commanded a small flotilla, Hornigold in the Ranger, Teach in a captured sloop, and Bonnet's former ship, the Revenge. They plundered vessels along the eastern seaboard, including the Robert and the Good Intent, stripping them of valuable cargo. Hornigold soon retired, leaving Teach in full command. Everything changed in late November 1717. Off St. Vincent, Blackbeard captured the French slave ship La Concorde. She was a large, powerful vessel, over 100 feet long, carrying 40 cannons in space for more than 200 men. Teach refitted her as his flagship and renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. What happened to the enslaved people on board is uncertain. Some may have been set ashore, others possibly joined his crew. Through the winter of 1717 to 1718, he prowled the Caribbean, seizing ships like the Great Allen, which he looted and burned. By now, his crew may have numbered over 300. Captains who survived his attacks described him as tall, thin, and dominated by an enormous black beard. Like a frightful meteor, one said, coiled into pigtails and festooned with ribbons. In battle, he sometimes placed slow-burning fuses under his hat, the smoke curling around his face to create a vision of a fury from hell. Blackbeard was part of a loose network known as the Alliance of Pirates, crews who coordinated to control safe havens across the Atlantic. They sought not treasure chests of gold, but valuable commodities like sugar, tobacco, cocoa, and dyes. And contrary to later legend, pirates rarely buried loot. In May 1718, Blackbeard staged his boldest move, the blockade of Charleston, South Carolina. For more than a week, he anchored his ships along the shallow bar outside the harbor, seizing any vessel that tried to pass. One was the Crowley, carrying prominent passengers. Blackbeard demanded a ransom, not in gold, but medicine. Governor Robert Johnson agreed, and once the ransom was delivered, Blackbeard released his prisoners. But the risk of reprisal was high, and he soon sailed north. Shortly after, disaster, or perhaps design, struck. While attempting to careen his ships at Beaufort Inlet, both the Queen Anne's Revenge and a smaller sloop ran aground. Some believe this was intentional, allowing Teach to shed much of his crew and keep a greater share of the loot. Within weeks, Blackbeard appeared before North Carolina's Governor Charles Eden and accepted a royal pardon under King George's Act of Grace. This law offered amnesty to pirates who surrendered by a certain date, but only for crimes committed before January 5, 1718. The Charleston blockade had come months after that deadline. Here lay the problem. Governor Eden, widely seen as corrupt, was willing to overlook the dates and protect men like Blackbeard, possibly for personal profit. But to the north, Virginia's Governor Alexander Spotswood had no such tolerance. He viewed Blackbeard as still an active criminal and began planning to eliminate him. By late 1718, Blackbeard was living near Bath Creek, North Carolina, still keeping a small sloop and a loyal band of followers. Rumors of fresh piracy circulated. In Virginia, Spotswood decided to act. He commissioned Lieutenant Robert Maynard to lead two ships, the Ranger and the Jane, south, to capture or kill the pirate. On November 21st, Maynard anchored at Ocracoke Inlet. The next morning, the Adventure tried to escape but ran aground. Cannon fire erupted. Blackbeard, refusing to flee, fought with ferocity, boarding Maynard's ship in a bid to seize the upper hand. In the bloody melee that followed, he was surrounded, slashed, and shot until he fell. His head was hung from Maynard's bowsprit as proof of victory. Blackbeard's death was only the beginning of the crackdown. Stede Bonnet was captured and hanged in Charleston that December. Hornigold vanished at sea. Calico Jack Rackham was executed in 1720, his lovers Mary Read and Anne Bonny captured with him. By 1722, Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, was dead off Africa. The golden age of piracy in the Atlantic was ending. In 1724, a book appeared in London, A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, by a mysterious Captain Charles Johnson. Whether the author was a sailor, a pirate, or even Daniel Defoe himself, the work cemented Blackbeard's legend. From then on, his name appeared in novels, plays, and eventually films, from Treasure Island to Peter Pan to Pirates of the Caribbean. In the late 1990s, the wreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge was found off North Carolina. Artifacts from the site, cannons, weapons, personal items, have brought historians closer to the man behind the myth. Edward Teach's career as a pirate lasted barely 2 years. Yet, in that short span, he carved out a reputation that has endured for more than 3 centuries. Was it deserved? Perhaps not in scale, but in terror, spectacle, and sheer audacity, Blackbeard remains unmatched. And perhaps that is why, even now, we still tell his story. Thank you for watching.